her relating her experience within the public school systems in Pennsylvania and Lancaster County.
Hi, I'm Sara, and I will be talking to you a bit, about dyslexia and how, at least, my own experience and the general experience in the school system that, that I feel most people have. Okay, so here we go. For most teachers, I think they have good intentions. They just don't understand the extent to which a learning disability affects a person's life. The school system is designed to teach neurotypicals. The kids with learning disabilities don't belong, and we know that. It's frustrating to know that you're supposed to have the right to an education, but that doesn't apply to you. That because you think differently and cannot learn the same way others do, that you are not able to get the valuable education that you deserve. But the school system passes it off as that you're just slow and don't have any potential. That they're not holding you back, but letting the harsh reality show. When the harsh reality is that the school system is broken in more ways than one. They belittle you and create a stigma around learning disabilities that's traumatizing. The school system will question if you have a learning disability until you start questioning it too, making you feel guilty about going to special ed or having accommodations. You're not even 4 feet tall, and you're questioning reality and worrying about if the school system is right. What if you don't have any potential? What if you don't have a future? If you're neurodiverse, you know the exact feeling I'm talking about, but for my neurotypicals out there, I'm gonna accommodate you and bring you into the world of what it's like growing up with dyslexia. You start school when you're 5, and for the first time, you're being judged on how well you can do things. By the time you're in 1st grade, you're being graded on spelling tests and being put into reading levels. If you're the kid who's failing all their spelling tests no matter how much your parents have you studying or how hard you try, and you're reading at much lower levels than your friends, you're not going to think very highly of yourself. This is the age that you start building your identity, and for kids with learning disabilities like dyslexia, that means the foundation of your personality is that you're lesser than everyone else around you. As time goes on, you fall further behind and things only seem to get worse. I remember being 6 years old the first time a teacher told me, "You should know this." It took me 10 years to process what that phrase actually meant. At the time, it just made me feel stupid. But the reason I didn't understand was that I wasn't being taught in a way that my brain could process the information. When you tell a student with a learning disability that they should already know the material that's been taught to them in a way that they can't understand, what you're really telling them is that they're an inconvenience and that you're not going to educate them. That it falls on them yet again to educate themselves. That they don't have the same rights to an education as everyone else. You don't realize it until much later in your education that this is really going on, but you've always had the feeling that you're a burden to others, a burden to society, because that's what school teaches us. Teachers don't know the words or the power these words have. They don't trace them back to a past where the school system has denied a student accommodations based on the premise that they're not struggling enough, that they must just be stupid. To them, telling a student that they should know something is simply a moment in time. But kids with learning disabilities hear those words or variations telling us that we're behind our classmates far too often. Teachers don't understand that dyslexia isn't just a problem with reading and writing, that dyslexia affects recall, memorization, hearing, and so much more. Teachers don't fully grasp what we go through and the message that they're feeding us year after year. But why would they? When the school system doesn't give them training on how to address students with learning disabilities with a sensitivity to our past. They don't teach the teachers properly, and the chain reaction starts. I know teachers have good intentions. They were never taught to recognize this language, so they don't know the negative effects their assumptions that we understand their teaching format have. But sometimes it's really hard not to get angry. To have to accept this as an accident, yet to be too petrified of educators to correct them on how they should address students with learning disabilities. I can only hope, I can only hope that future educators are more prepared for understanding the complexities of dyslexia and like learning disabilities, so that future generations have their struggles not only acknowledged, but addressed. Dyslexia is not a problem, but the way we address it in the school system, by blaming the student, is. And that's all.
Thanks, Sarah. Now we'll go to Kevin Ghaffari, who is a special education teacher.
Thank you very much, Paige, for expressing your experiences and describing what it was like as a student to deal with this disability or this difference, not so much as a teacher. And also, I'll just mention my background, having not ever been identified with dyslexia as a child. The special ed IDEA laws were not in place at that time. I'm old enough to have preceded all that. My mother identified me early on because I came home complaining about reading assignments and wanting to drop out of school in first grade. So she got me into a parochial school that provided. The public school at that time, whole language, this is in the New York metro area, really wasn't providing that type of instruction. Other students had the same difficulty, and their parents also had to go and look for programs outside of the public school system. This was 30, 35 years ago, and things should have changed by now. And certainly we know what is the best practices in working with students with dyslexia or any other disabilities. But the big problem here in Pennsylvania, well, I'd say listening to Paige's experiences and the trauma that she went through, it falls upon teachers, myself and others, to be the urgent care, special ed teachers and reading teachers to be the urgent care providers. We're the ones who are supposed to be understanding, to help other teachers who are working with students like Paige who might not understand the disability, to be able to work with those students without that anxiety or dismissal or minimization of what their problems are. There aren't that many teachers that I've worked with in this field who have dyslexia. Maybe there's a reason for that. I think if my mother hadn't gotten me the attention that I'd had early on, I can't imagine the course of my life. I could show you statistics on prison population, drug addiction, other things related to the inability to perform well in school, which is what dyslexia results in. I've worked mostly with low-income students in Baltimore City and in the New York metro area. And what's provided for them is unfortunately not sufficient. If a parent is able to go and look for those resources, then there's more hope. So I kind of look at the trauma, handling the trauma in two ways. One is triage, like just handling the social emotional issues that arise from it. And the other is trying to prevent it. And I hope that the prevention is where we're moving in this state. And Dr. Craven will speak to some of that after. For handling the trauma, I've been, well, first I'll mention I've taught in 3 different states, in New York and Maryland and now in Pennsylvania. And I didn't think moving to Pennsylvania, there would be such a difference. And maybe that was naive on my part. I didn't know the educational funding circumstances. I think coming from Maryland and New York, I just thought that there would be the sufficient funding for special ed. The salaries are there. My salary is better here than it was in Baltimore, but what's provided for the students, which is my primary concern, is in no way commensurate or similar in any way. So that's the preventive. We'll get to that in a moment. For handling the trauma, in Maryland, we were beginning to develop a program. After I've left, I hope it's gone further, to provide not just study skills. I know here at McCaskey and most high schools, we have a study skills program for students with these disabilities. But with Maryland, we're providing disability awareness. They were learning about their disability, learning about the strengths and the areas that they'll need to work on to strengthen, and the social emotional issues that arise from it, how to handle situations that they deal with. So self-advocacy, speaking up for themselves, talking to teachers about their disability, taking pride in what makes them different, not insecure or doubtful about it. So I really think that Pennsylvania would benefit if we can't get the provisions that we need to improve the funding for special education, at least provide that triage where we could work with students. We're doing so much on social emotional. I see so many initiatives throughout our district and many districts to work with the social emotional needs of students, but it's as if nobody's really acknowledging the extreme social emotional needs of students with learning disabilities or any disabilities. And I think Maryland was the first district that I worked in where we really talked to the kids about their disabilities and had a whole, we went over their IEPs with them, you know, not individually in the class, but we went over what's in an IEP. So they all knew all the segments, all the sections, they knew the jargon of an IEP. This was in high school. I would recommend it being something provided in 6th grade and in 9th grade, like a 6th grade module for kids beginning the academic rigors of middle school, and then 9th grade to prepare them for the high school, and not just study skills, but self-advocacy and disability awareness. Then the big issue, prevent. How can we do more? And I imagine everyone here is aware of the funding differences between states. I wasn't as much coming here. And I can't cite the statistics to say how low Pennsylvania is, but it's really low. I almost feel if you were a parent in this state, it would be better to move to New York or to Maryland. They're so close, and the amount of money is like 3 to 4 times more money is spent for special education services. So that, of course, hits students with learning disabilities and the type of remediation that they get, the type of literacy training that they get. You know, I don't want to pick on, I mean, for instance, I'm looking to do the Wilson training. I've done some of the Wilson, but to do the full Wilson training this summer. And the IU13 in Montgomery County offers it as part of their professional development training. So if I were in Montgomery County, I would both have easy access to it. I'd have a cohort of other teachers doing, and then I'd get the discount on my payment for it. Or it's more likely my district would be able to pay for it. And I don't want to put anything on my district here because the funding just doesn't allow them to be able to provide for it. So it just seems if Montgomery County knows that Wilson is an effective program, why isn't it available for more districts to be able to offer their teachers? I think the unfair funding throughout the state, which is a word that you know we can legitimately use since it's been determined what fair funding would be. The unfair funding, I think, you know, impacts the personnel, staff that's being able to be hired. In my district, I know we're short staffed for special ed teachers, and yet we have a higher special ed population and a greater need. The programs, the reading programs, like I said, Wilson and other reading programs that we're able to afford, that's impacted. And then the professional development training that goes along with those programs is impacted. And I think those disparities are so great that we need to all, I don't know if everybody here is aware of several groups that are working to improve the fair funding throughout the state. I can put up some of those in the chat. The other thing, I know we have somebody here from the Children's Dyslexia Center, which is part of the Freemasons, I know, the Scottish Rites Freemasons effort to provide dyslexia tutoring throughout the country. Thank you very much for having that. I think that's, you know, the other alternative. If we can't improve the programs in the state, particularly in cities like Philly, Pittsburgh, even Lancaster, we need to do what we can to try and increase the number of tutors so that we can do it, you know, until the schools are able to provide it, be able to have it. I could give as example one student in my class who'd been in the Children's Dyslexia Center for about 1.5 years, working with a district teacher from one of our schools who was doing it through the Children's Dyslexia Center. And the boost that she got from 1.5 years in that program was, you know, made all the difference between her and her classmates. She's much more confident about what she's able to read. And she's known the success and the emotional bolstering that she got from that tutor working with her. So, you know, if we can't provide it through the schools, I think individual tutoring is the next best hope. 5 minutes, I'm gonna wrap up. I'm done now. I'll give the rest to you and leave time for discussion.
Okay, and I'm going to give you a little bit from the parent perspective in really trying to deal with dyslexia and having a dyslexic child with no background in dyslexia. And I want to point out that I am in a position of privilege. I'm a professor. I have access to colleagues who can help me. I have a very, you know, reliable salary. I have access to healthcare. I am, you know, probably more able to deal with some of the stresses that dyslexia brings than most people because of the exceptional resources I have at the university with my colleagues. And still, you know, in getting into a situation where I had to try and help my child with dyslexia, it was a real struggle, and it was very traumatic. First of all, the denial of resources through the public schools was very frustrating. The inability to see the word dyslexia in an IEP meeting was confusing. I didn't even know what an IEP was, an individualized education program. When I was thrown into it, I started receiving all the documentation. I've got my book here. You can see my daughter attended a public school for 4 years. This is the documentation I received from my IEP meetings and various other meetings I had to attend. This is overwhelming. It's overwhelming for somebody who's a professional in the education field. I can't imagine somebody who was going through this, whose first language wasn't English, or who didn't have a college education, or who didn't know, you know, some of the aspects to ask questions about. It was really disconcerting to put my trust in the school system and then to find out later how much they had essentially sold me and my daughter down the river by not providing the information or providing the testing early. And so, you know, while we can't, you know, say that the teachers are responsible for this, you know, this lack of reading competency in Pennsylvania, they certainly are part of the process, and we have to fix the problems that exist in the school system. There's a lot of pressure on teachers, you know, who have gone through and become educated, but feel pressure not to identify students who are clearly dyslexic because they become, you know, money that has to be paid out in the system. So, you know, for me, I have promised my daughter that I would do something about this so that other students wouldn't be similarly impacted. And I want to talk about some resources and share some resources. So I'm going to share my screen for a minute, actually longer than that, and go through some of the resources that I'd like you to be aware of, and things that I didn't know about immediately. Excuse me, I'm going to move this down. First is the PA Training and Technical Assistance Network, PATAN. PATAN has a lot of information about dyslexia, and they did the dyslexia screening and early literacy intervention pilot program, which came about in 2014 and ran for 3 years with 8 schools and then added 15 more, which means that there are 23 schools who are like going, you know, forward with more cutting edge programs to educate students. But we have 500 school districts, right? What about the other 470 some odd, you know, school districts? Those students aren't getting what they need. I also wanted to do a shout out to the people who did the READ Act, which is in Congress now at the Education Committee. Hopefully that will bring similar results to the pilot to 5 states, again, not 50, but 5 states. Also a shout out to Representative Nielsen for creating dyslexia intervention professional development requirements. This requires teachers to have 4 hours, 4, of training. While at the start, not nearly enough. And then I'd like to show you, you know, the dyslexia, the literacy coalition that talks about the highlights of the decoding the dyslexia early literacy intervention pilot program, and gives you some progress there. I'd also like to give a shout out to Jessica McKee from Decoding Dyslexia, and Daphne Iliana, who have helped me, you know, with thinking about, you know, how to move forward with dyslexia legislation. But right now I wanted to show you a resume share. How do I share? Okay, I'm going to stop share and start again. I'm going to try and share something that's on my other screen, and that's not working. All right, I'm going to not share then and just talk to you about it. Hold on, go back to my other screen. So I'm not sharing, and you can see me and I can talk about it. So I've created some proposed legislation, and this is what I'd like to talk with you about after we open up the roundtable, where I talk about, where we need to go from here, because I really think we can't wait for the pilot program to go through 23 schools and then say, where do we go from here, and open it up to another 15 schools. We have so many students who are being impacted day by day, right? Because they're not getting the support that they need. So many parents who are being confused, so many students who will go up and have their self-confidence impacted, their self-esteem impacted, who may go on and not to go on to college, or may not even finish high school because they're not getting even identified. Because our state doesn't have screening for dyslexia. Many states do, but we don't screen everybody in kindergarten through second, or even kindergarten through eighth, right? Through thinking about dyslexia. So in some of the things that I'm proposing dyslexia screeners for every school, a child through kindergarten through eighth grade, because sometimes reading disabilities develop later. I'm proposing state recognized screeners that would be evaluated by PATAN, who are the people who did the study, and that they would move forward with these screeners and provide them to the schools. I'm providing specific intervention criteria and specific intervention deadlines that include providing the student with appropriate tiered dyslexia specific intervention through what's called an MTSS framework. That's a multi-tiered systems of support framework. You don't really need to know that, but and also providing the student with emotional support and guidance related to their disabilities. These are things that are often left out. People are given more time on the test, but they're not told much about, what their differences are and how to deal with them. I'm also, looking to propose changes to the educator preparation programs, including 20 hours of classroom learning until 2025 for each reading teacher, which includes special ed and reading specialists. But by 2025, adapting the dyslexia literacy networks ideas of requiring 2 3-credit hour courses, one focused on K through 2 and another focused on grades 3 through 4, that stand alone in scientifically researched and evidence-based reading instructional strategies. And a third course in assessment of reading skills in children K through 6, based on evidence-based screening and assessment procedures. So all this, taken together will enable the state to aptly educate our students. And I think this is really important. I think, we have in our state 39% of all students, when averaged over the first grades 3 through 8, read at basic or below basic levels. 39%. That's saying we're doing something wrong. And these strategies will help all students. So, if we think about, what Kevin Ghaffari has said about the impact on people in terms of their self-esteem, in terms of their confidence, in terms of their ability to succeed in class, we see that, doing the right thing for students with dyslexia also helps the state. We want our students to be well educated. We want a well-developed workforce. We want to, have fewer people in prison. We want to have fewer people addicted to drugs. We want to make sure that, everybody can reach their potential in the state. And that's not happening in Pennsylvania. While we like to tout that we're on the cutting edge because we had the pilot program, we're not really on the cutting edge. We're on the bleeding edge here. And I think, we're sacrificing our students because we're unwilling to take the initiative to do what needs to be done in all 500 of our school districts to make sure that every kid gets the best chance at having a foundation in strong reading skills so they can do well in school. I wanted to end there and also ask if I can get back one more person to speak because Gabriella, who's one of my students, also has dyslexia. And I thought it would be nice for her to share what her experience was in being educated in the school system.
Hi, I'm Gabby. So I'm actually from Long Island, New York. So that's the schooling system I went through. And I did get tested at a young age to see if I had a learning disability because it was very obvious in kindergarten that I could not keep up with the other kids. They were in much higher reading levels than I was even like then. And I was clearly falling behind. And so from there, I was in reading. I got pulled out of class to work on, I can't really remember, it was in kindergarten, but like reading sections. And then by the time I got into third grade, I was in resource room. And I did that until I was a senior in high school. And in those classes, they would go over all of my work. Essentially, they would read my tests to me because I couldn't comprehend a lot of directions and stuff like that. And growing up, I definitely felt like dumber than the other kids because I couldn't comprehend what they could so easily. But in reality, it's just like I had to learn it a different way and I processed things differently than them. Thankfully, my grandmother, who was a teacher for 30 plus years, she would tutor me every morning before school for an hour. I'd get up at 5 a.m. So I would be able to keep up with my classmates and learn strategies that would help me in the classroom. And all that definitely paid off because I started seeing improvements, but I definitely felt that some teachers would just try to pass me just so I could move on to the next grade instead of really like helping me with my issues. But the ones that like really focused on me and gave me the chances to like redo assignments if I like couldn't comprehend the instructions and stuff like that, they saw like I was putting in the effort. I just didn't know how to like get those results I needed because I didn't know how I needed to do it. And the ones that really worked with me and like gave me that extra chance saw like the improvements in how much effort I put in. And that is really what helped me get through and learn those skills that I needed to be successful today.
Great. Thanks so much, Gabby. I'd like to open up for questions or suggestions or ideas because we have so much work that we need to do. And I know a lot of people have been working on this in Pennsylvania. And I want to mention that I'm not an expert in any way on this. I'm just a concerned parent. And so I know that Jessica McKee is here, who's been working on this for a long time. And I'm interested to see what her thoughts are. And I also see Decoding Dyslexia is here. So, but does anyone have any questions or concerns that they'd like to start off with?
In Pennsylvania, how does testing happen? Is it just a teacher notices something, a parent notices something?
Yes, essentially, you can come in and as a parent, you can say, "Hey, I've noticed something, and I'd like to, I think it might be dyslexia," and then you can request an evaluation, which is what I did. But what I found was I was told that, oh well, a lot of these things they resolve by third grade. Don't worry about it until after third grade, and then we'll take a look. I even said I think it's dyslexia, straight to the people, I was talking with. And, essentially after third grade, if you haven't addressed it, it becomes much more difficult to remediate the problems. So, essentially Manheim Township School District allowed, my daughter to get to the point where she was going to have to struggle after that point. And I think, as a lot of parents, I really trusted my school district. And, that was misplaced trust. And I think all parents, kind of have that trust going in, unless you're, unless you're more in the know, I guess. And I feel like particularly parents that don't have perhaps English fluency or don't have a college education would be much less attuned to some of the manipulations that the school districts do to avoid. But if you put in writing that you want to test and you send that to the school district, they must test your child. Is that correct, Mr. Ghaffari? Unmute.
Okay, if they have reason for not testing, or they can argue that there's no need or some other, then they may not, but generally, yes, they have a certain amount of time that they have to do the testing within, once you've notified them in writing. So always do it by writing, not by phone call.
Yeah. Stephen.
Yes, I really have enjoyed all the presenters. It's very informative, and I really admire the courage of all of you of speaking about this topic. I'm a professor at a university, Lock Haven, and I've been there for a while, and we work closely with the disability office. And one of the concerns I have for any disability, I have students, I haven't had a student yet, as far as I know, that's had dyslexia. There are a lot of other disabilities that they've had. But one of the concerns I have is more or less societal attitudes in general towards disability, that some of the students are so shame-based that they don't want to seek help, because there's a lot of, I teach some online courses, there's a lot of equipment, a lot of technology that can be of assistance to, hearing impaired, vision impaired, learning disabilities. So I guess I'm really concerned, and I don't know if you just respond to this, who would like to, that society, unfortunately, even though we talk and we have associations for different disabilities, we're still not at the point where people can accept that this is just part of life, that millions of people have different types of disabilities. And I guess, Mr. Ghaffari, you were surprised by the lack of funding for education in the state of Pennsylvania. It's a major problem across the board.
Yeah,
That we do not provide for, we do not see education as a number one priority. So could you respond, any one of you, to the whether there is still stigma around this? I'm somewhat appalled by teachers not helping students, for whatever reason, but does stigma still play a role, do you feel? Because it could be from K up until higher education. I know it plays a role certainly in mental health. But do people say, oh, I'm ashamed of this, I don't want to deal with this, and they end up not, it's one thing like not to have the resources, that's a solvable problem. It's another thing to feel a sense of stigma around having a disability, which really can impact people. So I would like to hear your responses, please.
Sarah, would you like to take that?
Sure. Especially as like a student right now, I definitely feel like there's quite a big stigma around like having a disability, because I will go up pretty much to anyone and be like, hey, I have dyslexia. I just want you to know, because I'm going to react differently to some things that you may say, but I always forget that when I say I have dyslexia, they think, oh, you can't read or write. They're not thinking, oh, you can't really process what I'm telling you well, or oh, you kind of question what you're hearing. But I definitely do feel like there's a stigma around accommodations and using them, or like pretty much doing anything differently from the norm. I was talking to my friend last semester and I was like, well, you have accommodations. They don't have a learning disability, but they have accommodations. And they were saying they were stressed about a test. And I'm like, well, use your accommodations, have that extra time so that you don't have to be stressed about your test. And they said, no, I think I'll be fine. I'm like, you are going to be a teacher. If you cannot like be able to, use your accommodations and feel okay about that, like what is that saying for your students, and kind of going into that. And I've also seen it in like I had a professor once ask me to spell out loud in front of a peer, and like I don't understand exactly why my professor, who had gotten my accommodations, like all my professors were sent my IEP, what I'm supposed to have, and thought it was okay to ask me to spell out loud in front of a classmate. And fortunately, the classmate had a more interesting response than I did to me spelling, which I misspelled the word so horribly that he turned around and he said, "Are you a foreign exchange student?" And I thought that was really funny. So I was just like, that made the situation, I think, worth it. But most of the time, that would be really shameful. But I do feel like when I tell my friends, like, hey, I have a learning disability, they don't understand what it's like. And they also just kind of, they seem to respond to, hey, can you like tone this down and like stop talking about it? And I'm like, no, this is a real problem. And it's something that I found, like, I know what dyslexia is. I'm not going to be like, it's something to be ashamed of. I can't control it. But I feel like a lot of people, especially if you get diagnosed later, I think the later you get diagnosed and the later you have to kind of come to terms with it, there is a stigma around, I don't want people to know. I don't want it to be part of my life. I want to be able to hide it. If that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks, Sarah. I think as well, it being an invisible disability also contributes to some of the issues, around, perceptions of others. Jessica.
But in a school, it's hardly invisible. That's based all around reading and writing. So I think the kids do stand out. And I think the stigma, I'd like to believe that most teachers understand enough about it to try and iron that out. But as Paige said, that isn't always the case. There's not a week or a month that goes by that a teacher in any school that I've been in says something that I know just is not what a dyslexic student needs to hear, that would embarrass them in front of their classmates. Whenever you have a group of kids together, they differentiate themselves for all sorts of reasons. So this, in a language-based learning environment, is just hard to avoid. And autism ASD in the last 5-10 years has gotten a lot more awareness and education. So other kids even know more about it. But many of our dyslexic kids don't even know much about their own disability. So it's rare to have other kids be understanding. If you can't read, if you can't write, it just translates to you're not smart to most kids in schools. So I do a lot of my work trying to make that understood with gen ed kids. Just the idea that text writing is only 10,000 years old. It's a relatively modern invention. There's a lot of brain research that shows that our brains were not designed for reading, that there's 4 or 5 areas that have to coordinate together to be able to read, whereas any kind of visual or other types of learning is what the brain was designed to do. So I think even if gen ed kids were aware of that difficulty, or even that gift that they have to be able to understand language that easily, it would. There was a book I was going to show, but I left it in another area. So yes, the stigma still continues. And as I said, ASD has been something where I see, and intellectual disability, I see kids very sensitive to other kids' needs. There's a real awareness that that's something real, whereas reading disabilities, not the same.
And I think if some of that was addressed in health classes and more explanation of the various types of neurological differences would be talked about, that would be helpful.
And in
Jessica,
Maryland,
would you like to add in something?
I was just going to say, in terms of the disability, both Sara and, Kevin said a lot of the same things that I was thinking, is that, it's invisible. It is harder to see. So, and in that terms, it lends itself for people to think then these kids or these adults are not smart. I even see it at work. I have a coworker and she's a manager and she can't spell. Her spelling's atrocious. And I hear people saying how stupid she is. And I'm like, yeah, she's not stupid. She just has a disability. It's okay. She just can't spell. Like, it's fine. But that in their mind, because she can't use proper spelling and proper grammar in her writing, she is not smart. And the other thing that in our experience, the stigmas start at school and they start with the teachers. And that is probably the most difficult thing to address. I mean, Sara said a lot about that. But I know for my son, if I see lazy or unmotivated in his IEP one more time, and it's always, and they're saying, well, if he was interested in the work, and I'm like, no, not interested. If it was work he was able to do, he's no longer interested when it's above his ability and he can't do it. But the teachers always label him as unmotivated. And so it's hard to go into a classroom when you're in, the person there that's supposed to be guiding you thinks that you're not making an effort, and you might be making 10 times the effort anybody else in that room is making. And they're giving you that stigma and, some of those, what I will call soul crushing, because I see it with my child, how frustrating it is to not be able to do what their peers can do, and how it's so hard for them and it's so easy for everybody else. But that comes from your teacher, because your teacher just doesn't recognize that you are struggling. And we have a lot of experience where they want to discipline it out of you. Well, if you don't do this, you're going to go to the dean, or you're going to get sent to the principal. And instead of actually going back and figuring out and helping and trying to figure out why they're not doing this assignment or this test or this whatever, it's, if you don't do it, you're punished. And that sends an entire wrong message to these kids. And the last thing I will say is not just teachers, but it comes down to administrators. In my son's IEP meeting last year, my kids go to a charter school, and their mission is college preparatory charter school. They are there. Every student is supposed to go to college. That's their mission. They want to prepare you to go off to college. And the special ed director said to me, I realize there's a juxtaposition between being a special, between being a, academically, centered charter school and having to teach special education students, with the idea that the implication that special education students can't go to college and that's not their path. And I was really kind of taken aback. I don't think she quite meant it the way it sounded, but she said it. And so underlying that is maybe a belief that our special ed students aren't as capable or as qualified as, some of the more neurotypical kids in the classrooms.
And if I can just mention also, because I went to a college prep school for a little bit, if you go to private school, they are allowed to deny you some of your accommodations that you have at public school. And it's really hard to, because now I go to Millersville, now I'm at a private, and I get those accommodations, but I legitimately went to a meeting this week and I was like, I haven't used these in so long. I don't know what accommodations I have, but I do remember these being very helpful when I was in public school. Can you please tell me and inform me what accommodations I can get, so when we're in person, I don't get overwhelmed by the fact that I can't pause the lecture and I can't just tell the teacher, hey, can you stop for like 5 minutes so I can process the last 2 minutes of what you just said? So
and there are plenty of private schools that are college prep for learning disabled. The school I taught at outside of New York, Windward, all the kids were going to college. All of their parents were paying, expecting them to be able to go to college. I know Philadelphia has 2 or 3 of those types of schools as well. So yeah, they definitely can go to college and be taught. As Paige is a shining example.
Linda's been waiting for a while with her hand up. So
Hello.
you want to put in it?
Yes. So I have 2 questions. Number one, about 2 weeks ago, a 6th grader, the school district of Lancaster come out and observe, and they wrote out a really nice plan. And then we went back and had a meeting with our private school, and we were pretty much told, well, it's a private school, we don't have to follow any of those recommendations. And it was just really heartbreaking because now at 6th grade, we're left with determining what do we do for the future for our schooling. Do we continue at our private school, or do we unenroll and enroll into the city school district? So does anybody have any feedback on that? First off, that's my first question.
I do. Going to a private school, if I don't know if you're at LCDS, but if you are, let me tell you, World Civ 1 and 2 is really hard as someone with dyslexia. But I remember being in school and having a lot of my accommodations.
They don't follow all.
What?
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, continue.
Right. Having a lot of those accommodations denied to me, and kind of looking back on that time, I do remember going to one of my teachers at some point and saying, hey, I'm spending 4 hours on your homework a night. Like, am I supposed to be doing this? And they just, like, their response was, you're just going to have to do that because you have dyslexia. And I was just like, I wasn't getting the accommodations I needed. Like, it really depends on how much your kid struggles without their accommodations. I think you really have to weigh that. But I know that, like, I originally was pulled out of public school so that I could get a good education. But then I didn't have access in my private school to special education services. I didn't have special ed. And I got tested again for accommodations when I was 16. And they were like, you're reading at a 6th grade reading level. And I was just like, I know that that's not right, that I can, but I was thinking, I haven't had special ed services. I was in special ed for like 3 years before I went to a school. So it really depends on how much you're struggling with reading or spelling. But for me, I think that having special ed for a few more years would have been really helpful to me, because at this point I'm, in college, and I'm thinking, am I even reading at a high school level? Am I reading at, like, I'm probably reading at like an 8th grade level now. And that's really hard if you're in college and you have to satisfy these G1 and writing courses. And you're just like, I really don't want to take them. I'm scared to death of, having a professor that doesn't understand learning disabilities and having to spend hours per night on their homework and not be able to have enough energy to put any energy to my other courses. So I definitely think it's something to consider, especially if you can't have special ed at a private school, because that can be really detrimental in the learning process.
Right.
And I think if you're, one thing I would suggest is there's a school in Paoli that is for students with dyslexia. So if you have the resources to go to the private school in Paoli, they are specifically focused on educating students with reading learning disabilities. So that is, something that is an option.
There's
There
actually,
are
there's at
there are
least
also
3.
colleges that are focused on educating students with dyslexia in college.
Then I did put into the AIM Academy. Somebody just mentioned Jessica. That's another. There's AIM and
We're in
something.
the Lancaster City School District, so we'd be having to look at a Lancaster
Wonderful.
City school. Okay. And
Okay.
some of the teachers are some of the teachers are accommodating, but like I think I've heard several echo, there's definitely a stigma, and you hear, well, I just don't have time for that. And there are definitely teachers that just, they really stress him out. My other question would be, how do you all feel our school pushes the importance of the students learning Spanish? And while I think it's great that students learn Spanish, don't get me wrong, my problem is Cole doesn't do English tests or spelling tests, and he hasn't for a long, long time, but yet they expect him to do Spanish tests and write things in Spanish and present things in Spanish. And we're having a really hard time with them, asking them, please, like, don't make him do that. Take that time that they're learning Spanish, let him focus on the English that he doesn't even know yet.
I would have
Yeah.
them get him a language
And
exception. Most
If you
dyslexic students can't.
in high
do
school, they're now doing it in middle school as well. Spanish instruction, we have it here, and we've been dealing with that for a while, trying to get parents to be allowed exemptions, because all the research that I've done, if you have difficulty with phonemic awareness and you're learning a second language, it'll mess up all of what you're learning in English. So if you haven't learned English well enough to learn to read, then you do not want to begin in a foreign language. Now the research does show that if you're being taught Spanish using phonemic awareness, it'll actually improve your English language learning as well. So in Maryland, where I was teaching in Howard County before Baltimore, they had begun to hire sign language teachers, and they actually made an exemption that allowed sign language as a foreign language, which was a great kind of equalizer. We had tons of special ed kids in the class, gen ed kids all wanted to be in it. So, and sign language is multisensory, and there's plenty of jobs out there if you learn sign language. So I would love to see Pennsylvania or even districts allow that.
So do you think applying for that in a private school setting, they would allow, you had mentioned
To be exempt?
To be exempt.
Yeah, I would really, I mean, you could look up some research and see, and I think most reading teachers know that it really gets in the way of language, of their own reading instruction. So I would ask for an exemption if you could, and see what the policy is.
All
We
right.
got
And
an exemption in a
it's
private
easy.
school.
Okay.
What's that?
We got an exemption in a private school.
You did.
Okay. Thank you.
Jackie's been having her hand up for a while. And then Adrian.
Well, I had my hand up, but kept taking it back down. When Jessica was, a couple people kind of tag teamed on things. I think when we look at the legislation, we're kind of back to that chicken and the egg kind of question. So are the teachers not sensitive to differentiating the education, differentiating in the classrooms because they've not been educated that way? So when we look at the package that we want to put together for legislation, are we looking necessarily only for screenings and interventions be put into place? We also need some legislation that the colleges are educating our teachers that way. I'm a 32-year teacher, so I understand some of the problems that people are having. I'm a reading specialist also. Right. But I was not educated as a reading specialist. I was not educated in the science of reading or in disabilities, which is kind of shameful. But so I think when we look at our legislation package, we have to look at how do we encourage our professors to take on the science of reading. And there's a very tiny wave that's happening. And I know, Dr. Craven, you are part of that wave, but it needs to become a tsunami.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Adrian.
Hi, I actually have more of a comment than a question. I'm coming from Canada. I follow the page on Facebook, and my daughter's 13 and she's dyslexic. And I can mirror, I mean, I'm in another country in a whole nother, never mind state or district. And I can mirror all of these things that are happening for you guys are also happening in our systems up here. We had to move to a different school district for our daughter to even just get her basic human rights when it came to accommodations. And even then, I mean, it's lacking a great deal. There was a huge delay in getting her diagnosed, huge 2 years in delay in on a wait list that she spent even to get that diagnosis. So it's I think really good for me to hear that this is something that's happening everywhere, and there are lots of people who are starting to get mobilized. And I'm not sure where to start here in our little community, but I'll definitely be following how it goes for you guys down there.
Well, I'm willing to, I put together, Mr. Ghaffari was talking about the other states and how they're a bit ahead of Pennsylvania, to put it mildly. I went on and I absorbed everything good that they did and tried to put it into one bill for Pennsylvania. So I'm still working on that. And if anybody wants to work on that with me, I'm happy to have the help and put our brains together and go after some representatives to sponsor some changes, because waiting another 10, 12 years, for the pilot to get through however many iterations isn't going to be helpful to the people who are young right now and who are going to be impacted for their entire lives because they didn't get the attention that they needed. Patience, you have been very patient. So do you have some question or comment?
Yeah, it was just a comment. My son is in the school district of Lancaster, and I love the district. And I was just on the comment of private school versus public school. I've had experience going to a lot of IEP meetings. My son has a 504 plan. It takes a lot of advocating, but I will say, being in a public school, you are afforded more resources. And then that's one less barrier that you have to fight. So going through the journey with my son and going through the journey with my clients, I always was a proponent for public school, and I've been very pleased with SDOL. I know I'm thinking Linda was saying that she was in between like a private school or a public school, and she was in SDOL. The biggest thing that I find really helpful is to have it paired with the guidance counselor. Sometimes they can be your greatest advocates. On top of with the principal and administration in your specific school. That was really helpful, because you do get some pushback, and sometimes, again, just as a 32-year-old veteran has said, they're just not aware of how to implement it and if it's going to be a huge change for how they will teach their classes. But it's really just an education piece that sometimes the counselor really just had to come alongside them and say, hey, these are the accommodations, and this is how we can do it. So yeah, I've been very pleased with how SDOL has implemented 504 plans, IEPs. So I'm just a proponent for SDOL in that regard.
Absolutely. Adrian, did you have another question, or is your hands just still up? Okay. I wanted to point to a couple of things in the chat. Jessica McKee talks about IDA and the importance of IDA. And I think the International Dyslexia Association has some wonderful standards for educating educators. And so if you are looking to do legislation wherever you are, those standards are something that you can go to and have been used to actually kind of certify teacher education programs. So I'm hoping that more teacher education programs will adopt those standards, because I think they're important. And the Decoding Dyslexia webpage is all great information as well. So if you take a look at that, it's a great resource. Patan, if you're a teacher, has training sessions on dyslexia. So again, another wonderful resource. But for me, coming in as a parent, I had no idea what Patan was. Like, I never would have found it if I just didn't happen to know somebody on my block whose sister was the head of Patan, right? So if you're new to this area of having a dyslexic kid, I encourage you to reach out to the networks, which are often on Facebook. So take a look around. And feel free to reach out to me at jill.craven@millersville.edu if you need to be connected up with anyone. I'm hoping to take some legislation that I've written up, which is about 5 pages, and get it out to Rep. Nielsen and a few other folks to see if they will sponsor it, because we need changes here. 39% below basic or basic readers is going to really, be traumatic as they work through the system, not being able to read. If you've got somebody who really doesn't have the foundation of learning under their belt, go into high school, how can you expect them to learn chemistry or history when they're struggling reading at a 4th grade level in high school? So we really have to think about the long-term consequences of not investing in special education in Pennsylvania. And for that, please look to Power and Fair Funding PA and the resources that Mr. Ghaffari put in the chat.
The Children's Dyslexia Center, I don't know if Linda or someone else had mentioned, if you're in the area, get your name on that list. It can take a year before you get to tutoring. The tutoring is free, and it's what's
wonderful. Jessica.
I just wanted to add to your statistic a little bit, since your conference was on, global citizenship. When you look at, if you break out the statistic of proficient readers for against race, it's only 18% of 3rd graders that are Black or minority students reach reading proficiency. 18%. So it's a staggering difference between the number of white students who reach reading proficiency and those of the Black and minority communities that do not. And that's part of this whole fair funding push, is that, it's the majority of the schools where Black and minority children attend that are not getting and receiving the adequate funding, and the schools where white children and wealthier districts are receiving more money. And that's one part of the problem. Money alone is not going to fix the reading and literacy crisis that we have. But it just to be aware that it's disproportionately affecting, and how they're evaluated, what types of evaluations they receive, is disproportionately underserving the Black and minority communities as compared to white students. And it's difficult to imagine, because as a white mother, I was appalled at the lack of services my son got. So to imagine that it's worse for other people is almost incomprehensible. However, the statistics and the data is there. It's much worse for, different communities.
And the school district of Lancaster has a lawsuit now to change the fair funding distribution. And I believe it's due to be heard in September because of the drastic differences in funding between districts. So I'm hopeful that, the 25-year clock that they've set for fair funding actually to become fair will be taken away, and that we'll actually have real fair funding, in the near term, because it is such a disservice to students in poorer school districts to not have the resources that they need, and particularly in special education, when the students are in need of more money, essentially for the tools that they need. It can really be a setback to their learning not to have the resources, because the school district just doesn't have that. So what Mr. Ghaffari was talking about, with certain districts being trained and getting these, other abilities, the teachers have more wherewithal to do different things and to learn more to bring back to their classes, because the school districts have more money. Yes? Is your hand just still up, Jessica?
There's a group called Power. It's a church affiliated advocacy group in a number of different areas, and they have an educational initiative, and they did a great study with great graphics that I can't pull up right now that shows this racial disparity that's enormous between districts. And just tragic to see that the affluent and predominantly white districts are getting more money, and the less affluent and racially diverse districts are getting less money. It's pretty good graphic. I wish I could bring it up, but I can't right now. We're out of time.
Yeah, it's a video actually. So you should be able to find it in the videos. But if you send us an email, we'll find the video for that and send it out because it is really powerful. And a lot of the churches, at least in Lancaster City, have become involved in the fairness in education because they see it as a human rights issue. And so that's really, an interesting development that the churches are becoming aligned because Power is an interfaith organization, kind of connecting with them so that more people are aware of the inequities in education, in Pennsylvania particularly. So hopefully we'll be able to move the needle a little bit on that. Gina, welcome back.
Hi, yes, I kind of hate being the one to, slow down the conversation. I just want to be mindful of our participants' time. But really thank you to all who have spoke and even our participants who also engaged in dialogue. It really helps just the learning for everyone to understand, the challenges that are at hand and also some of the positive solutions that are also and support services that are also available. So thank you all for sharing. For people who are a part of the conference, this was our last live session, so I kind of want to do my last visual thank you to all of you. It seriously meant a lot that you supported our conference and our events. And yeah, go out, be great global citizens, be great neighbors. I really hope that you can take things that you learned and you can put it into action. That's all I have. Thank you guys so much.
No, thank you all for coming. And feel free to contact me if you need any resources. I'll try and get you to the people who might be able to help. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody.